Hello and welcome to the Worn and Wound podcast. My name is Zach Kazan. I'm the managing editor at Worn and Wound. Thank you for joining us today on yet another episode of the Worn and Wound podcast. We have a great show for you with a guest making his Worn and Wound podcast debut. I'm really happy to welcome to the podcast one of the newest members of the Worn and Wound team, Devin Pennypacker. Devin, how's it going?
Hi, good, Zach. Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for jumping on the podcast. You've been with the team for like a month or two, like something around.
You can say a month. It feels like a lot longer, considering all the travel, which I'm sure we'll get into. But it's been roughly about a month here. Hit the ground running very quickly and haven't looked back once.
So you are. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing at Worn and Wound before we get started, just so folks have like an idea of what your role is on the team.
Yes, so my title is Digital Media Specialist, I believe. Might be Digital Media Manager, depends on who you ask. But basically, I'm the guy behind a lot of the social media stuff going on. I've been dipping into some editorial and some video work here and there too. Traveling to cover events, doing pretty much anything and everything that is asked of me. I kind of dip my toe into every pond of Worn and Wound, including the events and the editorial and the shop side of things. So you'll see me pop up in a lot of different places. You never know where I'm going to pop up next. And it's been a lot of fun.
It's amazing how many places you've popped up just in the last like month or so. You're really kind of like the Swiss Army knife of the Worn and Wound team. You kind of like do a little bit of everything. You'll have your first piece of editorial content on the site soon enough.
Second piece of editorial content.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, second piece of it. Yeah, that's right. Good. Yeah, thank you for reminding me of that. But no, you just sent me for editing your piece on a Seiko, which we can get into later on if you want to give folks a preview. Before we do any of that, as you know, we always do a wrist check on this podcast. What are you wearing today?
Well, I unintentionally put this on this morning. I've been kind of swapping between a lot of things lately. It's been a bit of a weird summer for releases, and that Seiko editorial piece that you're talking about is on its way back to me from the studio, so I couldn't put that one on. So instead, I put on one of my other newer acquisitions with the Certina DS Super PH 1000M.
Very cool.
Big, chunky, deep diver. I put it on that Milanese because the nylon it comes with is, quite frankly, just not that great. But this is just one of those watches that when I saw it released last year, it was around like November, December. It slowly kind of trickled out this year. I actually wasn't too excited about it until I put it on for a photo shoot. And the second one on my wrist, I was like, yep, that's one that has to make its way into my collection. It's just, for under $1,000, it's offering a lot of value. And it honestly just looks great on a large wrist. So I couldn't say no.
Very nice. Yeah, no, that's a cool piece. Certina is one of those brands that it really flies under the radar, I think. Like for a Swatch Group brand, you just don't like really hear much about them in the United States because like I think Swatch kind of focuses their efforts on Certina in foreign markets. But they make a really nice watch.
They do. They have a lot of history behind them too. A lot of interactions with Tektite, with the Australian Special Forces, a lot, like you mentioned, in Europe. But for whatever reason, they kind of fly under the radar here, and hopefully that starts to change in the near future. But until then, I'll be that guy who everyone looks at and goes, "Oh, Certina, what is that?"
Yeah, very cool piece. Thank you, Devin, for the wrist check. I'm wearing an Autodromo Group B in the Verde Smeraldo colorway, which is a really kind of like lush, like almost like turquoisey green color with their black coated case and bracelet. I've been trying to. I had been looking at Autodromo for years. Obviously, I've been a fan of the brand, and this piece debuted at Windup New York City last year, and I kind of like was just immediately drawn to it, and I knew that was the Group B for me, so I jumped on it.
Very cool.
It's like a really cool like summer watch because it's like very lightweight and very easy to wear. So I'm really enjoying it.
Very cool.
Yeah. All right, Devin. So you mentioned what you're doing here at Worn and Wound, really covering like digital media, social media, jack of all trades. That's sort of your job description. Obviously, you're fluent in the language of watches. Tell us a little bit about like what got you into watches. Where did it all start, and a little bit about kind of like how you come to Worn and Wound, like what your watch history is.
It's a meandering story for sure, much like most of us out there.
That's
For
what
me,
podcasts are for. This is
right.
where you come to meander, I think.
I was told that we have an hour to fill, so I'm here to just tell you a very
Yeah,
long, really boring story
feel
about
free.
my
Yeah.
personal life. Yeah, so that's what we're here for. I actually, when I was little, I actually wore watches. I used to style my outfits with watches. I used to wear a lot of silk button-down shirts and Jinko jeans and all of that kind of stuff. And everyone kind of made fun of me at the time, and now everyone's kind of copying that style again. So full circle. But from there, I don't know. I just kind of got more into the outdoor industry. I got more into backpacking and rock climbing and kayaking. So it was always important to have some sort of time telling device on my wrist. So I didn't pull out my non waterproof phone to check the time and make sure that I was making my times on the route the entire time.
Hmm.
And then eventually I kind of decided, you know what? I have to get away from the Fitbits, the Timexes. I really need to make the jump into a nice, decent mechanical watch. And I picked up my first premium watch out there, which was the Seiko SNZ something or the other, $80 special from Amazon. Was really excited about it. 30, it's like 36 millimeters, I think, really, really
Yeah, those
small.
are small. Yeah.
I wear a lot of large watches because my wrist is 7.5 to 7.75. So a
Hmm.
36 millimeter watch on my wrist looked hilarious, but I was adamant that I couldn't wear anything bigger. It would just be ridiculous to wear anything bigger. So I wore that watch for a long time, wore it up until the point that the rotor fell off of it. And I realized, okay, cool, I need to fix this now.
So it
And
literally fell off. Like in a like
literally
you
fell
can
off.
those have a exhibition case back if I'm not mistaken, right? So you
They
could like
do.
probably see the rotor just
Yes.
kind of like yeah.
And
That's nice.
that was
Nice
the
to know.
first time that I really kind of paid attention to the movement. Up until that point, I
Yeah.
just kind of I knew it was automatic. I could hear it winding in the background, but I never paid attention to it. And then all of a sudden, I realized, oh, there's more going on here than meets the eye. Staring in through the case back, I actually cracked it open and tried to fix it, and that did not go well. So I put it all back
Yep.
together. I sandwiched it back inside and kind of screwed the case back on with all the parts jangling around. And I went to the only person who I knew that knew anything about watches, Justin Satters. He's a painter of
Hmm.
watches. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with
Sure.
him. And I said, Justin, I really like watches. I want to get into watches. I want a really nice watch. I want a black dial. I want it to be 36 millimeters, and I want it to cost like less than 150 bucks. And he's like, okay, cool. Here's a watch for you. It's a Seiko. You're gonna love it. Put it on. It was a Pepsi Turtle, and wore that watch for about a week. Fell in love with it. Still knew nothing about it until I Googled it and found the price point and went, oh my god, I'm wearing a $300 watch. What is going on here? Went back to Justin. I'm like, hey, I appreciate you letting me borrow this. But I mean, it's too expensive. I'm kind of looking for something different. And he's like, well, here, try this one out. And if you like that, let me know and we'll kind of go from there. Go hiking with it, really falling in love with this watch. It's a chronograph, so I'm playing with the chronograph functions. And I go to Google that one and I find out that I'm wearing an Omega Speedmaster Reduced. And at that point, I was just like, oh
Oh,
man,
yeah.
I'm hooked. You know, I'm gonna buy this watch now. I'm gonna save up. I'm gonna buy this watch. I'm gonna go for it. And from there, it just kind of became a pit that I slowly fell down into. Just looking up reference numbers, looking up movements, looking up the history. And Justin was there to make sure that every time I took a wrong turn, he kind of nudged me right back down the same path. And
It
yeah,
doesn't it doesn't sound slow at all. It sounds like you went from a like $80 Seiko that broke right up to like one of the most kind of like iconic watch families of all in like a really short period of time.
yeah, I did take a very fast step back from there, and I bought an SKX 007,
Hmm.
which I ended up modding eventually, but I fell in love with that watch, and I wore that watch for a long time. And that was the one that really kind of kept me in the hobby because there's so much enthusiasm and passion around that model. Obviously, we all know that. We don't have to talk about that any more than we already have. But it was a cool way to get into it because it was a watch that at the time was trading for well below retail. You could
Yeah,
pick them up for, I think I bought mine for like 85 or 95 bucks, which, you know, a lot of people out there are kind of cringing at because you can't get them
sure.
for less than 300 or $500 with a good example now. Um, but yeah, I just kind of from there started going gradually up and up and up. And the next watch I got after that was a Samurai. That was my first like real serious chunky dive watch. And then yeah, just exploded after that. I was hooked. You know, swapping out straps, modding them, buying high end, buying low end, trading watches. It became an addiction very quickly.
Um, so like I hear a lot of like you know sports watches in there like in your
Yeah.
early history. Is that pretty much like the lane that you've stayed in? Would you say that that's kind of your like
No,
bread and butter? Or do you like have you like branched out a little bit since the
I
early days?
I kind of go for anything that catches my eye. I really
Hmm.
couldn't tell you at the end of the day why I like the watches that I like, because they don't really stay in the same category. We talked about it briefly, but we picked our watches for the year,
Yeah,
our favorite releases of the year, and my favorite release of the year was the Baume & Mercier Clifton Baumatic Moon Phase, which is very clearly not a tool dive watch.
sure.
That is firmly in the dress watch category, but there's something about the design language that just catches my eye. I can't stop looking at it when it's in front of me. Um, it's a eclectic design with like a modern twist, and I think that's where I kind of really get into it. I like the off the beaten path choices that I can put on and stare at for a long time and really fall in love with, but then just not look at and forget about for the next week. And that's kind of where my collection, I don't know, range comes from.
Yeah, it's kind of that's sort of honestly like that's kind of where I'm at too. I like watches that have like a little bit of like a collector identity, something that is, um, you know, like not for like the not for like the normies, for lack of
Yeah,
a better term. Like, I like to, wear a watch that I feel like I've picked this out, like it exists, and I like, I chose it for a specific reason, and usually that means a watch that's just like a little tweaked somehow and like a little bit different, but at the same time, I'd like to be able to, um, I like to be able to wear it every day, like in theory,
yeah,
and that's like a tough balance to find sometimes, a watch that's like different enough to appeal to like your collector's sensibility, but versatile enough to like not like draw attention to itself, I
yeah.
guess. Like that's sort of something I'm always thinking about.
Well, I mean, to that point, I also do occasionally strap on an old vintage rectangular case Doxa that
Hmm.
is very far outside of that wheelhouse. That's
Yeah.
one that if I'm washing my hands, I'll actually take off. So, I mean, if you looked at my collection, I don't think you could really choose an identity apart from this guy likes watches. And
Yeah.
I hope that's a lot of people out there because, quite frankly, I think that's more interesting than the I only collect black dial divers.
Yeah, amen to that. I think that like variety is the spice of life, and
Yeah.
that certainly extends to watch collecting for sure. Is vintage something that you have like dabbled in beyond that Doxa, or like
I would love to.
what's your yeah.
I just can't. I mean, for me, if it's a rectangular or a square case, sure. But a lot of the round cases back then were 36 millimeters or smaller. And at that point, it just looks like I'm wearing a child's watch. I can't pull them off. I admire them from afar. I've actually bought a lot of vintage, like Hamilton pieces for my partner, just because she can pull off a small vintage Hamilton and I just can't. But I still want to collect them and admire them and play with them. So it's a weird part of the collecting journey that I have to kind of avoid, unfortunately.
Sure. So when did that? So you mentioned earlier that your first watch was the little 36 millimeter Seiko. When did that shift happen from thinking that's the only size you can wear to like now having like a different point of view where you feel like you like fit a bigger watch a little bit better?
Yeah, true. I mean, I guess now, yeah, I really do look at 37 to 45. That's kind of my zone. But honestly,
Yeah.
I'd wear bigger, I'd wear smaller if it just spoke to me. But I think that shift really happened. I mean, if I'm being honest, probably back when I put that turtle on for the first time. That was
Mm,
when I realized, oh, I can wear a watch that's larger than that, but I don't feel it still because of the case geometry. Obviously, those cushion cases are just wildly comfortable. They have that Seiko
sure.
magic going on where they wear a whole lot smaller than you'd expect them to. But the hard thing for me is actually I wear my watches lower on my wrist than most people do. And so I always feel that the crown is digging into the back of my hand, especially when doing different activities, kayaking and hiking, all that kind of stuff. So to have a large size case with the crown that just protrudes too much still won't work for me. I really have to find that nice balance of a larger case size that it sits well with a crown that's tucked out of the way or tucked in enough that it doesn't really dig in too much. So
Yeah.
it's a weird balancing act.
I have a similar kind of a similar feeling about that because I also wear my watch a little bit lower on my wrist than most. But I think that's like a common thing for folks. Like, I mean, I have a 7.5 inch wrist. It sounds like we're about the same size wrist wise. I think that's fairly common for folks with larger wrists. The watch just kind of like falls naturally closer to like the lower portion of the wrist, and it does like
Yeah.
make for a very different like wearing experience, I think, on a lot of watches.
It does. And honestly, too, one of the least comfortable things about wearing a watch sometimes is if it restricts your mobility at all. So if
Yeah.
you are, I mean, even you're going to reach to open a door handle and you feel that it's kind of like holding your wrist in place, that is one of the most uncomfortable things that you can have in watches. And so that's
Yep.
something that, unfortunately, it sounds like we both have to deal with quite a bit.
Yeah, it's a first world problem, but it's still a problem.
For sure.
That's what I always like to say. Yeah. Um, so I wanted to ask you, Devin, about a press trip that you recently went on with Rado to a tennis tournament. Um, I'm not going to attempt to pronounce it because it's tricky. We'll link to the piece that our colleague Griffin wrote about his experience there. But I wanted to get your take. What was this trip all about with
Yeah,
Rado?
it was pretty cool. So Rado is launching their kind of affiliate partnership program where they're working with influencers to try to show off their watches in the United States a little bit more, as well as outlying areas as well, especially down in South America where they're pretty popular. And they're partnering up with a lot of different sporting events to kind of tout their technologies, their lightweight capabilities with ceramic, their anti-shock capabilities, and their movements. And I mean, tennis is a perfect sport to try to show that off, as we've seen with a lot of larger
Hmm.
brands. And so, yeah, a couple of us went out there with their group of new influencers. We went to the Mubadala City DC Open tournament, which
Very nicely
happens every
done.
year.
You
Thank you, thank
nailed
you.
it.
I've been
Yeah.
practicing. Obviously, the level of competition was very high, but a lot of the high level players were over in Europe competing in the Olympics.
Hmm.
So the turnout for the event was actually smaller than I think that they were expecting. But overall, I think it was a huge success. There was a lot of fun, a lot of heat. We got to play with the watches. We got to try some stuff on. I put on the Anatom a couple times, and
Hmm.
I weirdly like that watch. Again, talking about how
I
it doesn't fit into my ethos at all, but
I'm
it's
a
cool.
big fan of that watch. I will put a link in the show notes, of course, but I reviewed that watch for the website earlier this year, and really, really enjoyed it. It's just a very cool design. They did a nice
It
job
is.
with that
Yeah,
piece
well,
for
and
sure.
the strap integration is just very comfortable too. So
Yeah,
it's a one cool package. But yeah, we basically just spent the whole weekend hanging out with the Rado team, watching tennis, playing with the watches, and really just kind of taking in all that it has to offer. The tennis culture there was really rich, obviously being a pretty historic tournament. Rado has a lot of connections with sport watches, but maybe not necessarily the brand recognition that they deserve. And so it was a cool opportunity to just kind of stand up front and center and show off the brand really to an audience that might not be paying attention because the larger names like the Rolex and the Richard Mille and the Hublot, they kind of steal the show when it comes to tennis. And they don't leave room for a lot of these other brands that deserve that same level of praise.
sure. Yeah, it's Rado's an interesting brand. Like I think of when I think of Rado, like the first thing that comes to mind are their ceramic
Mm-hmm.
watches. I think of them as kind of like masters of ceramic. Particularly the True Square watches are watches I'm really fond of. They do a lot of like limited editions in that True Square format, and like this like really creative stuff. Lots of colored ceramic, really cool dial executions. Do they have any of that
They
at
did,
the?
yeah. So
Yeah.
they had all the True Square, well, a couple True Square models, and like their teal and their yellow, kind of showing off some of the colors. They had the ceramic Captain Cook there, which was pretty cool to see.
Hmm.
And they had, speaking of Master of Metals, they had one of their Diastar originals, which uses the
Yeah.
Ceramos material, which is pretty much scratch proof. But goes way back to that very eclectic like 70s design, looks like a spaceship. And I think probably the coolest thing in their entire booth that they had there to show us was this little presentation mirror and piece of ceramic. So they had this tile that was made out of the ceramic material the cases are made out of, and they gave you a carbide tip and just told us to go to town. And you scratch the mirror, you scratch the steel, and it just tears it up. And then you get to the ceramic, and I mean, I'm a big guy and I'm putting my body weight into it, and I'm not leaving a mark on this ceramic. So it's just
Yeah.
really cool to kind of see that in practice and know that when you're buying these watches, a lot of the times when you see a lot of bright, vibrant colors, okay, those are going to fade over time. Are they going to look all right? These ceramics are not going to fade on you. They're going to hold up to the toughness and durability that you need them to be holding up to. And really, it's just an impressive technology overall.
Yeah. Have you ever owned a ceramic watch?
I have not. I dabble with like the ceramic inserts. I've swapped them into a bunch of Seikos for the durability. I tend to lean away from them eventually because I like the aged look, and the ceramic just doesn't
Hmm.
age.
Yeah.
But the ceramic Zenith Pilot Flyback Chrono is one that holds a special place in my heart because for whatever reason that watch just screams my name. And from the second I put it on, I kind of fell in love with it. So that is one that might sneak into my collection here eventually.
Yeah, that's a really cool piece. I've had a couple of ceramic watches over the years. I own one currently. I have a Bell and Ross multimeter. It's the multimeter BRO3 chronograph, which is a ceramic case, but my first ceramic watch was a Zenith, and they do a really nice
Oh,
job
cool.
with ceramic. I had a Zenith Defy Classic in black ceramic with a skeletonized dial, which is one of those watches I kind of regret letting go of, like because they've sort of like discontinued that line and they've moved on to a different kind of Defy, which I also really like. But sometimes I think it'd be fun to have like one of each Defy, like a vintage Defy, which I also used to own, and a Defy Classic, and like maybe someday down the line a Defy Skyline. But Zenith does a fantastic job with their ceramic.
They do.
Watches.
Well,
One
it's
of the
funny
best.
too. I mean, when you think of ceramic as a material, most people are thinking of Omega, they're thinking of Zenith, but a lot of people don't think about Rado. And
Hmm.
Rado was one of the people really pushing the forefront of that technology in their watchmaking.
For sure.
So it is cool to kind of see them, push a lot of that noise aside and say, hey, we are making pretty much every one of our models has a ceramic model as well, or a Ceramos model. You should come and check it out for a fraction of the price of some of the larger brands that are out there. So it's a cool way to kind of experience the I don't know, the new technologies, the new materials, without necessarily taking the full plunge into something like a Zenith Pilot, where you definitely are taking a large step into the ceramic sector of our industry.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the ceramic Pilot is um, that's another like price category for sure than
Yeah,
than the Raz. More of a more of like a true kind of like luxury watch and like in air quotes piece. But yeah, no, I love the creativity in Rado's line of ceramic watches. They're doing a lot of really cool stuff. So that's very very cool that you were able to experience that on the trip. And the watch they released was not ceramic, but a very nice kind of like execution of the Captain Cook with a blue dial, if I'm not
yeah. So it
mistaken.
had this kind of gradient blue dial, similar to we just talked about Omega. They had their summer blue collection. It was kind of like that, but a little bit deeper and richer in the hue, and then it had these this pops of like green around it as well, kind of connecting to the tennis tournament. And yeah, it was one that when I saw it in the photos and the renderings, I was kind of thinking, I'm not quite sure if that's for me. The Captain Cook's a model that's either a hit or miss for me, but when I saw it in person, I actually put it on my wrist. I was a big fan. I think it's actually a really attractive piece and one that's more versatile than you would think given the color scheme.
Yeah, the blue's really nice. I think I prefer the blue this year to the green one that they did last year for the same. They released around the same time for the same event, the same tennis event.
Yeah.
Yeah, very cool. Um, so you mentioned the Zenith Pilot in ceramic, which is like a newer watch that you said you have your eye on. I'm curious, like what else has kind of like caught your eye recently? That's a release from a year ago. What else, like in terms of like recent releases, do you like find yourself drawn towards? And do you agree that this year's been kind of like a slower year in terms of releases? It's really kind of like I feel like in the last like month or so things have like really ground to a halt just because of like summer break, that the Swiss watch industry always goes on.
Yeah.
But it feels like things are noticeably a little quieter this year than in other years past.
I think it's interesting because we had a huge boom around watches and wonders. We always do. This is typical of the
Yeah.
industry where we see a whole bunch of new watches that really blow our mind. And to be completely honest with that piece I was talking about earlier with the Baume and Mercier, if I kind of assumed that people would have taken the Black Bay or monochrome as their pick or the IWC Eternal Calendar as their pick. And so I was like, I'm going to pick something in the weeds that speaks to me personally. And then I saw that neither of those watches got picked.
Yeah, no one picked either of those. You could have had them both. Yeah,
They
it
deserve their
was.
flowers. They definitely
Yeah,
do. I'll stick with the moon phase for now. But I think we had a huge boom where there was incredible watchmaking. We all kind of rallied around it. We celebrated it. And I mean, those two watches in particular speak to the huge difference in releases that we saw. We saw a black diver that everyone went nuts for, and then an eternal calendar, which everyone went nuts for. And he ran the gambit in between, but after that, it all just kind of died off a little bit,
yeah.
unless you really know where to look. Because brands like Citizen, for instance, they've been quietly releasing some pretty cool watches all year long. But because people tend to overlook Citizen a little bit, nobody's really talking about those releases. They're all looking for Tudor and Rolex and Omega to kind of drop those big bombs. But some of the other brands have kind of snuck in there and released some pretty heavy hitters, in my opinion.
Anything specific like that jumps out? You mentioned Citizen.
Yeah, I
What's
mean, Citizen has come out with a whole lot of cool stuff, like their integrated pieces of Soyosas that they came out with. Obviously,
yeah.
those are going back a little bit now, but I'm a huge fan of those. They recently had a dive style watch. I can't remember the name of it now. It's probably Bryson or Garrison or something like that. But it was a super titanium piece with 100 meters of water resistance, has like a classic diver style, really good looking watch. There's just been a couple here and there that have just kind of hit the right notes for me. And then within the same group, obviously FC's been releasing some interesting things here and there too, really trying to tout their prowess when it comes to movement mechanisms and complications. And then you have Bulova that's really kind of coming out with a lot of stuff, more iterations on what they've already created, new color styles and stuff like that, but still cool offerings too. Just kind of really flying under the radar.
Hello, Worn and Wound listeners. Kat here from Worn and Wound, and today we have a special announcement. We are coming back to the West Coast. Any of you longtime Worn and Wound readers will know that the James brand is a company that's been near and dear to our hearts for quite some time. They're known for crafting some of the best everyday tools for modern explorers, including utility knives and tools made with premium materials. We're excited to share that the James brand has opened a new location in Oceanside, California. The space features a public retail area that showcases their signature, modern, and minimal everyday carry products. Join us in celebrating this occasion with an all-day West Coast summer pop-up and experience our unique offerings firsthand. The Worn and Wound West Coast Summer Pop-Up, hosted by the James brand, is going to be taking place on Saturday, August 17th from 12 to 6 p.m. Pacific Time at the James brand headquarters located on 425 South Coast Highway, Oceanside, California. This event is free and open to the public. Along with the James brand, you're going to see a few of our favorite brands there, including Artifact, Belmont Watch Company, Brew Watch Company, Citizen Watches, Lokai, and Zodiac, and of course, the Windup Watch Shop. On behalf of the James brand and the brands joining us for the pop-up, we can't wait to see you all and grab a drink, check out some cool gear, and talk watches.
You know, sometimes I have two minds about like the release cycle. You know, on the one hand, you know, like it's our living. You know, it's what we do day to day. So I want to see like exciting new things. You know, I'm always interested in like the new stuff that's going to come across my desk, both as, you know, like an enthusiast and a collector, and someone who like, you know, is eager to kind of like share these things with our reading audience and our podcast, you know, audience. On the other hand, it always struck me that like, you know, watches were not made to be like consumed on this like annual release cycle. That was never really, that's not how any like historic watch brand operates. Watches are something that you buy once and wear for the rest of your life historically. And it's only like a very recent development that relatively recent in the span of a long history that, you know, we think about watches in terms of like what's new for watches and wonders. And now not just that, but like what's new for like the summer release season and for like the fall release season. And I sometimes wonder like how to balance like those two things, because brands have to keep, you know, the serious collectors and enthusiasts engaged, you know, with new stuff coming all the time. But it's also like kind of counterintuitive in a lot of ways, I think.
Yeah. Well, and I guess I'll ask you this question though, but for me personally, last year we had so many big releases, so many great new watches that showed up on the radar. I think we all kind of got to a point where we got a little tired of the new releases, where there were really cool watches coming out that no one paid attention to because we just kind of looked at it and went, okay, well, you know, another new one came out. That's awesome. I'm still looking at this last week's version that came out. And this year, with it being kind of a lull, so to speak, I think that it's kind of building the excitement for that next big release, which I'm very happy about because I think the industry kind of needed it as a whole. But did you find yourself in that same camp where last year with all the big releases towards the end of the year, you were kind of, I don't know, release fatigued, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, last year was crazy. You know, as many people have commented, last year, you know, from Watches and Wonders onward, it seemed like there were just like a ton of like heavy hitter releases. And not that's actually like not the right way to put it. There were heavy hitter releases for sure. We saw them at, you know, in Geneva and elsewhere early in the year. But like even small brands, like brands in the micro brand space and the independent space, were releasing interesting stuff that's affordable, you know, really rapid clip, like all throughout the year. Like we were really spoiled for choice last year. So yeah, I think that like it's fine that there's been a little bit of a lull. You know, there are, I think, a lot more pros to that than cons. I think that everything just got a little crazy, like during the pandemic and then like the immediate aftermath. And there was a lot of like, there were a lot of speculators in the hobby. And I feel like things kind of slowing down has sort of like washed that away a little bit, hopefully. Not to like, gatekeep or anything, but like, it feels like the quote unquote, like real collectors are still, engaged. Maybe people who just jumped on, because they thought like I could like flip a Rolex for like a profit or whatever, like they might be a little less, we don't hear from them, quite as often.
Thankfully so. Yeah.
these days. So,
Yeah.
so yeah, I think that like these things always happen in waves, right? Like there's, the watch industry and other industries have always seen periods of, like boom periods where there's just like a ton of new stuff, lots to choose from. Things are great. Sales are great. Enthusiasm's at its highest. And then like, there's a lull, in that product cycle, just because it takes time to develop products. People need to save up for that next purchase. Like these are still expensive things. And,
Yes.
not everyone can like afford like one nice watch a year. Like that's a major outlay of money for a lot of people, myself included. So, I think we're definitely in a point where we're kind of like maybe like resetting, a little bit, returning to like a pace that feels normal, for the watch world.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and for me too, I am kind of treating it as a reset point where I'm looking at my collection and thinking, okay, what is going to stay in my collection after this year, and what am I going to weed out and trade into something new, trade into something bigger, smaller, diversify a little bit. It's a cool opportunity to really dig in as a collector, I think, and see what matters to you, not necessarily the hype behind it.
Yeah. I've kind of I've talked about this on the podcast before, but I'm definitely in like a consolidation mode. Like I'm actively trying to sell multiple watches that I don't either I don't wear a whole lot anymore, or just don't find as interesting anymore. And it's not that I have like anything else specific in mind. Like of course everyone has like watches that like they might want to purchase, but I'm not like lining up funds for like a specific watch. I just kind of want to like, I guess, be ready for like for
Right.
like the next thing. You mentioned you're kind of looking at your collection and figuring out like next steps. Do you have like specific watches in mind that you're targeting, or are you kind of
I
like in
do.
yeah.
So I have
care to share. I know it's a
well,
sensitive
So
topic
yeah, so I don't
sometimes.
necessarily want to call all of the watches out. Those who are close to me know what they are because I talk
Yeah.
about them at nauseum. But there are 9 watches that I have saved in a photo grid. I have 1x1s of all of the dials sitting on one photo, and I'm trying to like every couple of weeks look at it and see if there's one I can cross off. And so far, I haven't been able to do so. But they range the gambit all the way from a Glashütte Original CQ Panorama date to a Cartier Santos de Cartier. It could be anywhere in between there, but there are 9 specific models that have been on my wish list for a little while. Some vintage references, some newer references. That I'm kind of toying with the idea of making a like a one watch collection, so to speak. I'll never be that guy, but to kind of consolidate a lot of my watch collection and just wear that one watch for like a month or two and see what it would be like just to have that one watch for a little bit is kind of where my mind is going right now.
Yeah, I definitely, I got to a point with my own collection where I just like I could see visually, like when I would like look down at my watch box, which turned into boxes plural, like I just have too many watches, and like it regardless of like the amount of money spent on these things, like too many watches stresses me out, because it's like like so many of them are just like not getting worn. So like I really took a hard look. And what I actually did, a friend of mine gave me this advice years ago, and it's like, it's really good advice. Take the watches that you're like thinking of selling and like put them away, like put them in their like original box, like in a closet, and just like don't have them as like an option. And if you don't like miss them after like a week or a month or whatever, then that's like a pretty good indication that like you're ready to part with that watch.
I did take that approach. So I actually have a shoebox in my like TV cabinet that I just kind of have full of watches right now that I'm thinking about moving on from. But what I found was I took a very serious course correction, and I just needed more watches around me. So I actually resorted. I'm going to grab this really quick. I'm going to lean off camera and break the third wall, so to speak. But I now actually just have watches sitting on C-stands on my desk as like little desk clocks, because I noticed that this is a Trafford Crossroads, a project that I'm, very, very happy to have funded and been a part of. And, Nathan's a good guy, so I'm happy to support him too. But I realized I wasn't wearing it as much as I wanted to, but I still wanted to look at it. I still wanted to experience it. I still wanted to hear that Miyota 9000 rattle around in there. So I put it on the C-stand and I just have it next to my computer on the desk all the time, so I can still experience the watch without necessarily having to strap it on and wear it all the time, because there are other watches that are taking priority because of one thing or another.
Yeah. And I think that's a totally valid way to experience a watch, and to you're not actually like using the watch, but like you're getting some like aesthetic pleasure out of it, like having it on your desk. Like I also have watches that kind of like just exist on my desk. I have this it's in a position where I can't quite reach for it from where I'm sitting, but it's this like gold plated like knockoff watch, like Chinese made thing with like a fake tourbillon that I got at a Yankee Swap a couple of years ago with my like watch collecting crew. Like the idea is to like bring a joke gift, like essentially, that's like watch related. And so like I wound up with this thing, which is kind of looks like a Nautilus, but not really. I'll put a picture of it on Instagram and share it or something.
Awesome.
But it's really ridiculous, and like it's not worth anything. But like I would never get rid of it. But I get some pleasure out of just like having it on my desk, like looking at it, because it's like a little reminder of like a fun night,
for sure.
With friends. And I think that like, watches ultimately they are like aesthetic objects, they're design objects, and it's totally like legitimate to just say like, I want to experience this watch as like a desk accessory, basically. I think that's totally fine.
I have one watch wrist. I'm not a double wrister unless I have like a Garmin on. I'm not going to put two on. But I just don't have the time to give all of them the love that I want. So that's just what has to happen, unfortunately.
Yeah. I have to say, like, you're, having like 9 watches in mind for, potential purchase, and having like that system of like, having them in a photo album is, far more deliberate than my system, which is basically like jotting down notes of things that I find interesting and then like forgetting about them. And like if you go through the notes app on my phone, you'll just see like links and like random kind of like typo filled like digressions on watches that are completely like unorganized. And there's probably so many watches I've like forgotten I've wanted that I've like at one point identified as like the next thing.
That's a good test, though. If you forgot that you wanted it, you probably didn't want it all that much. You just bought into the hype. You fell into the cycle. You were part of the problem, Zach.
I'm very susceptible to hype. That is my problem, is that I'm very influenceable, I guess, at the end of the day. I'm
good to know.
I'm just a hype beast at the end of it. What can I do?
Well, I'll tell you what I will do, though. The day this podcast goes live, I will put a picture of all 9 of those watches in my Instagram story. So if you're watching, you can go in there and pick which one you think that I should buy next. Okay. And I'll forewarn you, a lot of them do look similar. So you will see that I definitely have a lane that I'm going for. But there's some pretty weird pieces in there.
I admire your willingness to put that out into the world, because that's something I really have a hard time doing. Like I said, I'm selling watches right now, and I've put some of them in my Instagram. Like I've just like listed them for, said like, this is for sale, DM me. And like, I've gotten so many more DMs asking me what's next than like inquiring about the watch in question. And, honestly, like that's a long-standing like pet peeve of mine. Just like, let me have this like fantasy of like the next thing. And also like, there is no like specific next thing. Like as I said, I'm kind of just like getting ready for some hypothetical watch. There obviously will be something new, but I don't know. Honestly, don't know what it is yet. So.
Well, I mean, chances are good that I put those 9 up there and people see them and I end up with something completely different. But that's a story for another day, I guess.
Fair enough. Something else I wanted to ask you about, Devin, is Windup Chicago, which was not your first Windup. I know you've attended Windup just as a collector and enthusiast in the past, but this is the first time that you've been at Windup as a Worn and Wound employee. And so I wanted to kind of like get your take on not that show specifically, but like what the Windup experience is like for you on the other side of it, and like what, if anything, is meaningful to you about something like Windup?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, if you guys are listening to this, you do not understand how much effort goes into setting up that show.
That's a
I
lot. Yeah,
was
there's a lot.
blissfully ignorant up until I went to Windup Chicago from the other side of the booth and had to set up all the tables and set up all the lights with the team. And it was just a crazy experience to see it all come together and then all come apart and go back home. And that was really cool. It was also just a really special moment for me as a new member of the team to be breaking down a table and be side by side with our co-founders, with our head of editorial, with our head of content. And we're all there as a team picking up trash together, which is something that I don't think happens in any other organization, at least not one that I've been a part of. So it was really cool to feel that camaraderie and be a part of the team. But I think more than that, it's the interaction with everybody. Yeah, it's great to go and meet the brands and see the new watches, but to hear the stories behind the brands, to actually, get to know the people behind those brands is pretty cool. But then to interact with other collectors is really special too. I had the pleasure of going out with Citizen to the Wind Up in a Lake and cover that from a social point of view. And to spend a day on a dive boat with a bunch of just incredible people was something I'll never forget. And then to come back to the show and be riding that high and immediately hit the ground running and start filming things and taking photos and talking to people and just doing the little interviews and stuff like that. It was really just a whirlwind experience. And funny story, actually, we did the thing that caught my eye the most from the show. You were a part of that. You picked the Citizen, I believe.
Yes.
I went last in shooting mine because I realized when I started going around and grabbing team members that I actually didn't stop to look at the watches the entire show. I needed an hour to just run around and look at all the booths to figure out what my watch of the show was. It was wild.
Yeah. I think that's an experience that everyone who's worked a Windup has had at one point or another. Like it's very hard to see things like as you're kind of like being pulled in all these different directions. Like the idea of like experiencing the show as a normal attendee, like going from booth to booth, just like looking at watches is like very, very hard to do that. Like you really have to like make time to do that if you're working the show. And I think you talk about like like being like interacting with the community and like talking to attendees. Like I saw you doing that like all weekend, and like that's like really sort of that's like to me like the core Windup experience is like having that community interaction. It's so important, and like for me personally, like that's the thing that I always take away from these shows, regardless of which city we're in. There's always this like great community that comes out for it.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, the people inside of this community are incredible, but a lot of us, we don't get the chance to actually meet face to face. We're all behind the keyboards, we're all behind screens, behind the camera, and maybe we have an Instagram conversation here and there, but that's about it. So to really kind of sit there in person and talk to each other, this is just going to happen.
Yeah, you have for those of us, those of you listening, there's a cat, a Devin's cat. I assume it's your cat. Just made a cameo appearance on.
She's been fighting to get on camera this entire time. She is a glutton for the screen, that's for sure.
Well, I mean, Devin, this is your purview now. You can carve that out for social if you choose to like make your cat
perfect. This is my new media. This is my new headshot for the website, I think.
I think that's good. Yeah.
But yeah, we going back to the show though, it was just great to get a lot of people's faces to their names or their Instagram handles. There are people who I know their face and I know their Instagram handle, but I still don't remember their actual name. And unfortunately, that's just what it's going to be. But yeah, to just kind of get the opportunity to meet face to face and actually see the watches that we've talked about and swap stories and swap experiences and then start the hunt for whatever next piece we're all looking for. It's just a cool time to really come together and share that enthusiasm and talk about this really, really, really nerdy niche thing that we all like for some reason.
It's so nerdy. I don't want to spend too much time interrogating why I like it. I just like it, and it's a lot of fun. I think that's all there is. That's all there is to it. Last thing I want to ask you about. You're working on a piece. It'll be on the website in like a week or two probably on a Seiko diver that is kind of, I think, for most people like a little bit under the radar. It's not often discussed. Why don't you give folks a little bit of a preview of what you've got in the pipeline there?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if you don't mind, I'm actually going to plug two pieces that I'm working on because I think they're both incredibly fun to work on personally. I think people are going to get a bit of a kick out of them. The Seiko Samurai in particular, the new Samurai. This is, however you want to classify this, is this Gen 2, Gen 3, or is this Gen 4? For me, this is Generation 3 because the King Samurai still kind of fits into Gen 2. But Seiko released a brand new version of the Samurai, completely overhauled the case diameter, the lug to lug, the thickness, the dial design. It's all just new from the ground up, apart from the movement. So there's a weird conversation that we have to have there where, is this enough to make it a new watch? Is it enough to make people excited? Or is it just kind of ruining the Seiko Samurai and still charging you that same old price for it?
Mm-hmm.
But it's a very cool watch, one that I've had a lot of fun having on wrist. And honestly, you'll probably see me wearing it for quite some time to come.
Cool. And then, what's the other piece that you're working on?
So the other piece that I'm working on, I'm going on a very large trip abroad, going to be in Scandinavia in the backcountry for 2 weeks. And while I am there, I'm going to be stopping at a very specific company's headquarters to kind of meet the team there and see the behind the scenes of what's going on there. But more than that, while I am in the backcountry, I will be seeing some of the landscape that inspires the dial design that they have kind of crafted around their entire brand, something that they've become known for, and really something that I'm excited to experience both on the wrist and in person for the first time.
Yeah, that's I'm really looking forward to that piece. And I think it's fine to like, let's not share the brand quite yet. I think that'll be that's a good tease. But yeah, that's something that I'm really looking forward. I'm looking forward to seeing the photos like more than anything, because it's it's a part of the world that I think will be hard to like take a bad picture of, and the watch is also like incredibly cool. So
I'll have a drone, I'll have lenses, I'll have GoPros. I'm gonna have basically a full documentary kit out there with me, and
that's great. I didn't realize you had a drone.
Taking it all.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, fantastic.
Taking it all. So yeah, I'm gonna shoot until my fingers fall off, and hopefully pull it all together into one big piece.
Awesome. Well, that's great. There's obviously a lot to look forward to, Devin. Thank you so much for jumping on the podcast with us, and I think this has been a great introduction to someone who you, as our listeners, will be hearing from and seeing a lot more in the future, in the very near future. In fact, Devin Pennypacker, thank you so much for coming on the podcast this week.
Yeah, Zach, thank you for having me.
And thank you all for listening. We really appreciate it. We will see you next week for another episode of the Warner Wound podcast. Until then, take care.